or to keep you too long. So, yeah, I got to have our priorities right there. So, here we are, January 1st, the start of a brand new year. It's a time for us to look forward, kind of like I mentioned in our prayer time. And to me, it's kind of that same feeling that I would get at the beginning of a new semester, especially the start of the fall semester, when you had the whole semester in front of you, all those bad tests, all that was behind us. They don't count toward us anymore. Now, the teachers' attitudes toward me, they may have carried over, but the test, at least, did not carry over. Now, a lot of us really don't spend a lot of time looking forward. A lot of people spend a lot of time looking backwards. And, there's nothing wrong with remembering. We're supposed to do that. In the Old Testament, God tells his people in several places to build an altar or to remember a certain event or a certain thing that happened at a particular place. We get over to the New Testament, and Jesus tells his disciples at what we call the Last Supper, he said, do this what? In remembrance. Remember. Look back and remember. So it's not bad to remember. However, sometimes we can get stuck in the past. And that can happen usually in one of two ways. Either, number one, we look back at the good old days, the glory days, the remember when days, when we were the high school football champions, and we're 55 years old and we're still reliving that time, right? Or we look back on those bad times. Maybe it's something that happened to us, or maybe it's something that you as an individual that we did, that you just keep reliving that over and over and over and over, and you don't really make any progress, kind of like a broken record. Now, those of us who are old enough to have grown up with the record player or the turntable know exactly what it is to have a broken record, right? It's when that record has a little scratch on it, a little skip in it, and it plays that same annoying loop over and over and over again. Not a lot of, there's no progress made, right? The song's stuck in the same place, but there's a lot of movement. The turntable keeps going, there's a lot of movement, but there's no progress. Listen to this. Right? That's a broken record. And that can happen in our lives as well. We can relive that same event over and over and over. Some good, some bad, but we're really not going anywhere. Really no progress is being made. So this morning we're going to look at the life of the Apostle Paul as he reflects on some of his accomplishments, as well as some of the things that he's not so proud of, and we'll examine what his attitude was toward those life events, how he did not become a broken record, and how he kept from either banking on those accomplishments or from how he kept from allowing those things that he was ashamed of to keep him from living out God's plan for him. Also today I'm going to be sharing with you some very personal things from my past, some good, some not so good, and maybe you can relate to some of these as well. So let's start with the good things first. So, get my lovely assistant to help me today. Mike Harper, also known as Vanna White. All right, so here's my little treasure trove of good memories and things, just great things that have happened to me. This here, we know what this is, don't we? What is this? It's not Girl Scout. Somebody said Girl Scout. I was scouting for girls, but I was not a Girl Scout. This is my Boy Scout sash. I was an Eagle Scout at age 12. That's the youngest age that you can attain Eagle Scout. So that's like one of my first big accomplishments. These are personal things that I'm sharing right now. Okay, here. Now, these are things that I don't display at home, right? I had to go looking for them. It's not like I have a mantle full of these things from my junior high. Yeah, right, I know. Yeah. Got to be truthful here. All right, 1974 to 75, Jim Monroe, the O.E. Burris Progress Award. I was the best beginning band student at Dial Junior High. How about that? Oh, shut up. And then the next year, look, it got bigger. The best band student in junior high at Dial. Yeah, it kept going. Now, also, personally, got a picture here of my wife and daughter before she betrayed me and got married and moved off to South Carolina. Just a couple of things here that I'm kind of proud of. First of all, I definitely married above myself. I'm going to be talking about that in a little bit, too. And then my daughter, that's one of my life accomplishments, really, is that we raised a daughter that's pretty good. Also, personally, I've had one speeding ticket in 35 years. That was 35 years ago, and I can justify that too, okay? So I'm a pretty good guy, right? Now, financially, I'll talk about that for a minute. We have no debt except for our house payment. We've always lived within our means. Even when the means were slim, we tend to live in that, and that has led us to have a really good credit score. Wow. Yes, I'm approved for Toyota financing right now, I know. Now, how about religiously? Have you done anything religiously, Jim? Well, there's a few things I've done. Here are some flags here. These flags represent places I've been on mission trips. So these are the countries that I have been to, and these are various United States that I've been mainly leading mission trips on. So yeah, I've done a few things there. I'm a pretty good guy. Responsibility in work. There again, a very good, yes. 1979. If you guys have been around here for 30 or 40 years or so, you'll remember what is now condemned. It was the Holiday Inn out on East Harding, right? And I worked there the summers of 78 and 79. And July 1979, I was the best employee. I was the people pleaser of the month right there. That was their slogan at the time. We were the people pleasers. Okay. All right. What else we got going on here? Okay. Now, in my secular job, most of you know that I was in computer programming before ministry. And I'm not really bragging, but really, I was really pretty good at what I did. And always received top ratings at review time and all that, paid fairly well. Had such a good working relationship that when I decided to go to seminary, I didn't give a 2-week notice, I gave a 1-year notice. Gave a year notice, said, hey, this time next year, I'm out to Fort Worth. They kept me on for some reason, I don't know. So anyway, had that good relationship. And then after we got to seminary, after we settled in for a few months, I contacted the bank that I worked for and continued to do some contract work for them, about 20 hours a week. I'll tell you how well I was paid. I was paid so well that when I took my first ministry job, I went from part-time computer contracting to full-time ministry, and I took a pay cut. Yeah, that's how holy I am. Yeah. All right. Also, don't want to bore you, or I'm told not to bore you here. Seldom do I miss a day of work. In my 10 years at First Commercial, I think I had 5 sick days. And I've been here about 9 years, a little over 9 years. I've had 4 or 5. I may not be good at what I do, but I'm here to do it. Okay? That's right. Academically. Oh, yeah, we've got academics here. Outstanding senior scholar at Louisiana Tech. Oh, yeah. Gamma Beta Phi. What is that? It's an honor society. It says you're smart. Here we go. Here's what I worked for. This is my seminary degree. Got my Master of Divinity with Biblical Languages. 98 semester hours there. Yeah. That's almost another bachelor degree, isn't it? I had maintained about a 395 average, or right at a 395 average. Missed 1 class in the 3 years. There again, dedicated. So that's pretty good, isn't it? Look at this. I'm a good guy. No. You can just agree with me. So these are things I think about from time to time, and kind of give myself a pat on the back. I'm a pretty good guy. Look at my accomplishments. Pretty good stuff here. The Apostle Paul, he had a pretty good resume too, especially for his time and for his culture. Let's see what he has to say about himself. We're going to be looking in Philippians chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. There in your bulletin, you've got several scriptures that we're going to be looking at. Here, let's look at this first one. He's talking about himself, and these are things that are very important to his culture, especially as a Jew at that time. He said, I was circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews. In regard to the law, a Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church, as for righteousness, based on the law, faultless. He was what he needed to be. He was a very religious, very zealous person, did a lot of righteous things. I want you to think about something. What's the one thing, if you could think about on your entire life, but maybe even just within the last year, but what's the one thing you're most proud of that you would put on the Jim Monroe display table up here, right? What's something that, if you were really trying to impress someone, you would say, oh, guess what? I attained Eagle rank at age 12. Or what would you say? Think about that. We're going to come back and revisit that here in a few minutes. Now, let's get back to me. I know you've been waiting for this. Some of those bad things in Jim's life. Now, Mama's here today. Mama, if she'll come usually to the senior adult potlucks that we have on Wednesdays each month. And, invariably somebody will come up to her and say, oh, good to see you. Glad you're here. And we're so glad Jim's here. And she'll say something like, well, yeah, I could tell you some stories that would curl your hair. And she says that in jest, but it's true at the same time. So these are things that, and we all experience these, I think. These are things that I wish had never happened. Some things that were out of my control, as well as some things I definitely had some control over. And if I thought long enough, I could spend all day, going over this part. Now, as you notice, I don't have a table for those. I don't have mementos to remember the things I don't want to remember, right? So, as I've shared in previous sermons, let me just remind you of who you have on staff here. I told you about the painful course of events that led from my last ministry job to our church here. I told you, I think that was my last sermon. Then maybe a year ago, I shared about that 9th grade semester test that a friend of mine and we stole to boost our grade and ended up getting a 0. Remember that? Okay. Let me share with you a few more things. Now, most of us have had loved ones who have passed away too early. I think about my dad dying of thyroid cancer about 13 years ago. He wasn't a young man, but it was really before the normal life expectancy. Didn't get to be at my daughter's wedding, didn't get to hold his great-grandchild, all those things, a painful memory that I wish hadn't happened. So there are some bad things that happen to us that we don't have control over. Okay? But sometimes we still can relive those things over and over, can't we? But I've also done and had control over my share of bad things that I've done as well. Some bad relationships. Dated some gals, we'll say, that just weren't the best influences on a young man's life. One girl several years ago ended up on Arkansas's most wanted list. That is not a joke, by the way. As I said, I married above myself. Okay. Yes. All right. Another time, I was a freshman in college, and I was dating this girl, and my best friend, who was whom I roomed with, after a while, he just took me aside and said, Jim, this girl is just no good for you. She is no good. And boy, that ticked me off. That made me, who is he to tell me who I should and shouldn't date? Well, he was right, actually. But you know how that goes when you're in the middle of a relationship. You don't want to be told anything. So anyway, I've acted downright ugly, and I've said some pretty awful things to other people. But, once it slips out of your mouth, you can say, oh, I'm sorry. But it's like ringing the bell or squeezing the toothpaste. Once the bell is rung, you can't unring it. Once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't stuff it back in. Once those words are out of your mouth, you can say, I'm sorry, but still that damage has been done. Can you relate to any of that? Can you relate to some of those bad relationships you wish had never happened? I think maybe most of us can. Lying? Anybody here a liar? No, nobody wants to admit to that, do they? No. Lying to parents. That's something that I think most of us go through. I'll tell you one of the things I'm most ashamed of happened in the 11th grade. I kind of debated on whether to share this or not, but I'm going to anyway. My grades weren't really where they should have been at the time. And perhaps even as I look back on it, maybe even going through a little bit of depression there at the time. So one January night, I took the parents' car keys, slipped out through the bedroom window, took the car, and left town, and left the state for about 5 days. Very selfish. Probably the most selfish thing I've ever done. Because I did not think about the anguish that would cause the family. Of course, sin is self-centered anyway. Sin is very selfish. So these are things I think about from time to time, and if I stop and think about it long enough, I can really beat myself up and think, what in the world are you doing standing up in front of 300 people talking about Jesus? You're not good enough to be in ministry. You can go through all these different scenarios. But I think about the Apostle Paul, and I look at his life. Now, he admitted to doing some bad stuff as well. In Acts 26, verses 9 through 11, he says, I too was convinced that I ought to do all that was possible to oppose the name of Jesus of Nazareth. See, when he was that Pharisee, when he was Saul, he was a persecutor, right? He says, and that is just what I did in Jerusalem. On the authority of the chief priests, I put many of the Lord's people in prison, and when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. Many a time I went from one synagogue to another to have them punished, and I tried to force them to blaspheme. I was so obsessed with persecuting them that I even hunted them down in foreign cities. Wow. Did you get that? Saul persecuted Christians. He hunted them down. He okayed their execution. Now, if I'm thinking about anybody except Jesus in the Bible, I'm thinking Paul's a pretty good guy. He ranks right up there. And if he could do the things he did for God and basically okayed people being put to death, you know, I know we're not supposed to judge sins, but I'm thinking, well, at least I never did that, right? I dated some awful people, but I didn't put anybody to death. So let's think about this for a minute. What's the thing that you're most ashamed of? The thing you wish never had happened in your life? The thing that you, if you could go back in time and undo it, you would. What is that? What is that thing? Think about that, because we're going to come back and revisit that in a minute as well. So we're back to the Apostle Paul now. How did he turn from Saul the persecutor into Paul the evangelist? Well, he had an encounter with Jesus. As we continue reading in Acts 26, picking up there in verse 12, he says, one of these journeys I was going to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests. So he's going to persecute people. And about noon, King Agrippa, as I was on the road, I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, blazing around me and my companions. We all fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. Then I asked, Who are you, Lord? I am Jesus whom you are persecuting, the Lord replied. Now get up and stand on your feet. I have appeared to you to appoint you as a servant and as a witness of what you have seen and will see of me. I will rescue you from your own people and from the Gentiles. I am sending you to them to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and place among those who are sanctified, and a place among those who are sanctified. Period. Left a period off there. So you see Paul or Saul, he literally had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus. That's what turned him around. And Jesus took that guy who was a persecutor and okayed the execution of Christians and turned him around to being the best evangelist that we've ever known. Well, you see, something similar happened to me. I was about 29 years old, doing some good things, teaching adult Sunday school at church, a leader in the church. And one night in service, I didn't have a literal face-to-face like Paul did here, but it was undeniable that God was speaking to me and basically saying the same things. Why are you kicking against my plan for you? Why are you kicking against the free gift that I'm offering you? So I wonder that in your life. Has God been prompting you, guiding you, and you keep resisting? What does 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2 say? It says, I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. Or some versions say, today is the day of salvation. You know, many people resist God's call on their life by looking back on their own lives. And they look back and they say, well, yeah, I've done some bad things, but I've really done a lot of good things. See my table? I've got a lot of good things here, and they outweigh it. And so I'm sure I'll get into heaven that way, right? And so they don't really accept God's call. Or some people look back and they say, man, you don't know the things I've done. You know, and they can just give you a whole list of things, more than I've given you. And let me just say that we can't look back on our own accomplishments or our own failures, because you can't do enough good to earn your own salvation, and you can't do enough bad to where God won't forgive you. What we can do is look back on the cross, see what Christ has done for us, and look forward to an eternity with Him. Now, what better way to start a new year with a clean slate, with a new relationship with your Creator? We're doing things a little bit differently today. We're going to have a brief time of invitation. If that's how God's been speaking to you, this is the time to respond to that. We're having an invitation right now for salvation. When that closes, I'm going to come back and I'm going to conclude the sermon and do something at the end. So pray with me. All right, please be seated. Thank you very much for your attention so far. Even after Paul came to Christ, even after he became a Christian, he struggled with doing the right thing. You think, well, Paul, he was this holy saint and he went about preaching to the Gentiles and never erred or anything. Let's look at what Romans chapter 7, verses 15 and 19 say. Verse 15 says, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate to do. And then verse 19 says, for I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. I don't know if you struggle with that. I think most of us, I know I do, struggle with that on a day-to-day basis. That same struggle of not doing what we know we should be doing, but doing what we know we shouldn't be doing. It's just that constant struggle. So what can we do? What can we do? We can follow Paul's example. First of all, come to Christ, have that Christ face-to-face with Christ, as we talked about earlier, and surrender your life. And when we do that, 2 Corinthians 5:17 tells us this. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The new creation has come. He's a new creature. The old is gone. The new is here. We are a new creation. We can forget those bad things. They're no longer held against us. But not only do we need to forget the bad, we also need to not to bank on those good things, not to count on that. There's a phrase called resting on your laurels. A laurel in the time of Greece was a laurel wreath. It was a victory wreath. It was a symbol of status and success. And to rest on one's laurels mean I got my prize. I got my prize now. I'm just going to sit and rest on that. I'm going to bank on this to get me through life now. And that's what we don't need to do. We don't need to bank on those accomplishments. In fact, in Philippians chapter 3, verses 7 and 8, Paul says this about himself. He says, but whatever were gains for me, those things that I counted as gains, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage, that I may gain Christ. So it's okay to remember. We need to remember. We need to learn from that, but we don't need to dwell there, right? We're to forget the bad, forget the good, and press forward. And as it continues there in Philippians chapter 3, verses 13 and 14, Paul says, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Paul didn't look back, he looked forward, he pressed forward, and God wants us to do the same thing. So if you're here this morning, and I think most of you are here this morning, and if you're breathing, which most of you are still breathing at this point, God still has a plan for the rest of your life. Don't look back. Press forward. Have you ever heard of Good Riddance Day? I don't know if you've heard of that or not. It's an annual celebration in New York City between Christmas and New Year's Day. It's held in Times Square, and this year it was on Wednesday. It was Wednesday, December 28th. And a large shredding company comes in and sets up this huge shredding machine, and people have a piece of paper, and that's mainly for bad stuff that's happened to them over the year that they just want to forget and move on. And so what they do, it's a symbolic way for them to forget the past, for them to put those negative things behind them and to move forward. And so we're going to have an opportunity to do that as well. When you arrived in your seat, you have a little smiley face and a little frowny face. And I was asked on more than one occasion, who are we getting rid of today? When I saw that. So, as you think back on that thing that you're most proud of, that if you were to try to impress somebody, that you'd put at your top of your resume, what would that be? I want you to write that. You can, and it may be something very private. You may just want to put an initial or just some kind of abbreviation to where you know what that is. Okay? And then you think about that thing that you're most ashamed of. That thing that you really don't want to come to light. You certainly want to initial that, right? Not spell that out. And that, there again, that could have been something that happened to you that you had no control over. But still, we can relive that over and over. So what we're going to do, Mike, my lovely assistant, is going to help me again. He's going to set out a couple of shredders. And so you're going to have the opportunity to, like the people in New York City, to symbolically forget the past, to say, I'm not going to rest on my laurels. I'm not going to dwell on the past, whether that's positive or negative. I'm not going to let those things hinder me from following God's personal plan for me. I'm going to move forward and press on in 2017. You're doing good, Mike. You're doing real good. So we're not going to sing, but Tammy's going to play. We're going to stand. And if there's any other decision you need to make, there again, Brandon and I will be down here. And now's your time. Stand with me, please.